Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's victim story, I know it's annoying, but I need to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel here. I'm a new and small channel on YouTube, as you can see, and a simple click on the like button can help me a lot. So please subscribe to support me, click the like button and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Now, let's get to the case. Lily had always dreamed of traveling to the Maldives. It wasn't just the azure waters or the pristine beaches. It was the feeling of being far away, disconnected from the mundane, a place where she could lose herself in the beauty of the world. At 30, she had finally saved enough to take the trip of a lifetime. After months of meticulous planning, she landed on one of the smaller, more secluded islands, far from the crowds of tourists that flocked to the more popular spots. It was just her, the crystal-clear water, and the promise of adventure. Her friends had suggested the night snorkeling trip, a unique experience where visitors could swim with the bioluminescent plankton that illuminated the waters like tiny stars. In the deep. Lily had always been drawn to the mysterious, to the quiet beauty that came with the darkness. She signed up for the tour with enthusiasm, excited to experience the glow beneath the water's surface. The evening was warm, the air filled with the scent of salt water and the distant hum of the ocean. Lily stood at the edge of the dock, waiting for the boat that would take her out to the reef. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and nerves. It had been a while since she'd done anything remotely adventurous. Life had a way of settling into routines, but tonight she felt like she was about to do something that would change her. "Hey, you all right?" a voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. Lily turned to see Jason, one of the tour guides, walking toward her. He was in his late 20s, fit and tan from years of living in the sun. He wore a relaxed smile, though there was a certain intensity behind his eyes that hinted he was used to the dangers of the ocean. "Yeah, just a bit nervous," Lily admitted, laughing nervously as she adjusted the straps of her snorkel gear. "You'll be fine," Jason said, clapping her gently on the back. "It's a great experience. The plankton is amazing at night. Just stick with the group and you'll be all good." "I'll try not to wander off," she said, her voice betraying a hint of sarcasm, though she was already thinking about how the glowing plankton might look if she ventured a little further out. It wasn't that she had no intention of following the rules. It was just that sometimes her curiosity got the best of her. The boat arrived a few minutes later, its engines humming softly against the quiet backdrop of the ocean. It was a small, open vessel designed for excursions like this. There were only a few other people on board, a young couple from Canada and an older man who seemed to be a seasoned traveler. They all greeted each other briefly, exchanging pleasantries as the boat pulled away from the shore. As the boat cut through the dark waters, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a velvet sky studded with stars. The air was thick with salt and the faint scent of tropical flowers, the kind that clung to your skin after a long day in the heat. Lily's thoughts drifted to the sea. There was something both calming and eerie about the vastness of it. The water stretched out endlessly, a shimmering blanket of blackness, broken only by the occasional glint of moonlight. "All right, here we are," Jason called out as the boat came to a stop. He looked at the small group with a smile. "We'll get in the water now, and just remember, keep your distance from the reef and stay in sight of one another. There's no rush. The plankton will reveal itself in its own time." The others nodded, adjusting their masks and fins as they prepared to enter the water. Lily felt a twinge of excitement. She was ready, but there was also a sense of caution growing inside her. The sea had always been unpredictable, and while it was beautiful, it was also dangerous. Once in the water, Lily's eyes adjusted to the dim, bluish light around her. The plankton sparkled beneath the surface, glowing faintly as her fingers disturbed the water. It was like swimming through a galaxy, each movement creating a burst of light. She felt weightless, as though she were floating in space. The group stayed close at first, their voices muffled by the water as they pointed out the glowing plankton and the occasional fish that swam by. Jason led the group, gliding effortlessly through the water as the rest followed. But Lily's attention kept drifting. The bioluminescence was beautiful, mesmerizing, and something deep inside her wanted to see more of it. She glanced toward the horizon, where the reef lay, a dark silhouette, against the starry sky. She wondered what it would be like to see the plankton from a different angle, to explore beyond the confines of the group. Don't stray too far, Jason had warned them earlier, and for a moment, she hesitated. But the temptation was too strong. The light seemed to beckon her, pulling her away from the group. With a few quick strokes, Lily drifted farther, her movements careful but deliberate. The sounds of the group became distant, replaced by the soft swish of water around her as she swam deeper into the night. At first it was magical. The plankton glowed brighter the further she swam, and soon she was surrounded by a glowing cloud of light, as though she were floating in the heart of a star. But as the light grew brighter, the water grew darker around her. She glanced over her shoulder, only to find that the group had disappeared from view. Anxiety gripped her chest as she turned in a slow circle, her breathing shallow. The sea, once so serene, now felt vast and unfathomable. Maybe I should go back, she muttered to herself, though she wasn't sure why she hadn't already turned around. But just as she made the decision to head back, something shifted in the water. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She didn't see it at first, just a shadow beneath her, something moving with a fluidity that made her heart skip. The water around her seemed to darken, and then she felt it. A faint brush against her leg, cold, slick, and terrifyingly real. Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could react, something sharp and powerful latched onto her leg. The pain exploded in her mind, searing through her body as she screamed into the water, her legs kicking. Frantically, her hand reached down, only to find the sleek, unyielding mass of a shark's body. It was fast, efficient, its jaws closing tighter around her leg. The world around her spun. She screamed again, her heart racing, but her voice was swallowed by the water. Her muscles locked in terror. She kicked wildly, trying to shake the shark off, but it was relentless. Each time she moved, it struck again, its teeth sinking deeper into her flesh. Panic surged through her. She couldn't breathe. Her leg felt as though it were being torn apart, and she could feel her strength draining, her body growing weaker, the water around her clouded with blood, a dark red stain spreading in the otherwise serene ocean. The shark circled, its cold, predatory eyes locking onto her in the murky depths. It was waiting, as if savoring the moment. Lily's mind raced. She had to get out of the water, had to get back to the group. But the ocean seemed to mock her. It was vast, endless, and she was so small. Every movement felt like an eternity. Through the haze of pain, she managed to scream one last time, hoping someone would hear her. But the water swallowed the sound, and the darkness pressed in closer. The boat swayed gently on the calm sea, its engine idling, as the rest of the group readied themselves for the dive. The night was clear, and the stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds, the moon just a sliver above the horizon. The air smelled faintly of salt water and the earthiness of the island's tropical flora. A light breeze stirred the surface of the water, which rippled softly in the boat's wake. Lily, adjusting her snorkel mask for the 5th time, looked around at the others. The group was small, just 5 of them, each quietly adjusting their equipment, preparing for the night excursion. Jason, the guide, was giving final instructions to the couple from Canada, who were still fumbling with their fins. Lily noticed how relaxed he was, almost too relaxed. She envied his comfort in the water, the way he seemed to belong there. Jason finally turned to Lily. "You good?" She smiled, nodding as she gave her mask one last check. "Yeah, just making sure I'm ready." "You're gonna love it," Jason said. "It's a whole different world down there at night. Just keep close to the group, okay? You'll want to stick with us, especially in the dark." Lily chuckled, though a slight unease still gnawed at her. "I'm sure I'll be fine," she replied, her voice attempting to mask the nervousness she felt deep inside. The idea of venturing out at night into the unknown was thrilling, but she couldn't shake the thought of how vast the ocean was. It was endless after all, and there, beneath the surface, things moved that she couldn't see. Jason handed out the flashlights next, ensuring everyone had one. "Don't forget to turn it off when you're not using it. We don't want to scare the plankton off. They react to light, but they'll come back once you stop shining it around." His tone was reassuring, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he'd seen enough of the ocean's dark side to know when caution was necessary. Lily tried to push the thoughts aside. She had signed up for this experience after all. It was her vacation, a time to disconnect and see the world in a new light, or in this case, a new glow. The group, now suited up and ready, filed out of the boat and into the water. The coolness of the sea wrapped around Lily like a comforting embrace. As her body hit the water, she felt the tension from the boat slowly slip away. The water was warm, and the sensation of floating, weightless, was soothing. She kicked her legs gently to stay afloat, her head submerged beneath the surface, watching as the world below began to reveal itself. The plankton glowed in the water like scattered stars, bright blue and pulsating softly. Every movement she made created a trail of shimmering light, and for a moment, Lily felt as if she was swimming through a galaxy, each tiny organism lighting her way. It was surreal, beautiful. She couldn't help but feel that sense of wonder that only the ocean could inspire. "Look at that," one of the Canadians exclaimed. "It's like magic." Lily glanced over to see them pointing at the way their hands stirred the water, leaving behind glittering trails. Jason chuckled, swimming nearby. "It's the plankton. They're bioluminescent, reacting to your movement. It's like the ocean's own light show." Lily grinned, slowly kicking her legs and watching as her own movements painted a trail of soft blue light through the water. "It's incredible," she murmured to herself. Her voice was swallowed by the water, the sound of the ocean taking over her senses. Jason was leading the group toward the reef, and Lily followed closely, trying to stay close enough to hear his voice. The reef was just ahead, a dark silhouette against the glowing water. The others in the group were swimming, ahead, entranced by the glowing creatures. Lily, however, felt a strange tug at her curiosity. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something even more mesmerizing further out there, beyond the reef. As they neared the shallow water of the reef, the gentle lapping of the waves grew louder. The bioluminescence seemed to fade a little as they entered the darker depths. The sea floor was visible now, covered in rocks and coral, the water a deeper shade of blue-green. "Let's stay in the shallows," Jason called back to the group. "There's no need to go too deep here. Stick together." Lily nodded but didn't follow immediately. She hung back, glancing over her shoulder, her gaze drawn once again to the darkness, beyond the reef. The glow of the plankton seemed even brighter there. Her heart quickened, a sudden irrational urge to see what lay further out. "Just a little further," she muttered under her breath, almost as if convincing herself. She was aware of Jason's warning to stay with the group, but the water felt so calm, so inviting, that the thought of venturing a bit farther didn't seem so dangerous. Lily hesitated for a moment. She could hear Jason talking to the Canadians, up ahead, but their voices were becoming muffled, distant. She swam quietly, slowly, drawn toward the deeper waters where the plankton glowed more intensely. Her breath became shallow, as though even the air above the water was heavy with the anticipation of something she couldn't name. The water seemed to close around her as she swam further, her body slicing through the water effortlessly. She let herself go, the weight of the world above fading away as the light of the plankton became all-encompassing. For a brief moment, she was alone in the silence, surrounded by the shimmering glow. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears as the water grew colder. She didn't realize how far she had drifted until she turned back to find the others nowhere in sight. Panic flared in her chest as she realized how alone she was. She swam back toward where she thought the group should be, but the current was stronger now. The boat, the familiar sounds of the guide's voice had all but vanished. The only thing she could hear now was the quiet rhythm of her breath and the soft splashing of her fins as she tried to regain her bearings. "Jason," she called, her voice barely a whisper against the sounds of the ocean, but there was no answer. She kicked harder, trying to move faster, but the water seemed to resist her, pulling her further away from the group. Her breathing became faster, her panic growing. The ocean, which had once felt so peaceful, now seemed like an alien world, vast and unfathomable. Lily's heart pounded as she swam in circles, trying to retrace her steps. But the deeper she went, the darker the water became. The glow of the plankton faded the further she swam, leaving her suspended in an ocean of blackness. The weight of the silence pressed down on her, suffocating. There was only the sound of her breath, quick and shallow, as she tried to calm her racing mind. She was too far out, and that's when she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible splash. Her body tensed instinctively. Someone was out there with her. A shadow moved beneath her, sleek and fast. Her throat went dry. Something cold, something larger than her was approaching, in the depths, where the light could no longer reach. Lily's world shifted. She had ventured too far. The ocean was not a friend, not tonight. Lily's pulse quickened as she swam, her eyes scanning the dark waters around her. She should have never strayed this far. The sense of tranquility she had felt earlier was now replaced with a gnawing unease. The glow of the plankton was still beautiful, yes, but the water was becoming colder the further she swam. The lights, though brilliant and mesmerizing, felt alien now, like some strange warning of what lay beyond her reach. She stopped kicking for a moment and turned, scanning the distance. The small boat that had carried her group was nowhere in sight. She had been so captivated by the bioluminescence that she hadn't realized how far she had drifted. The reef was now a vague outline in the distance, barely visible against the vast black ocean. The sounds of her group, Jason's reassuring voice, the laughter of the Canadians, had all faded. The silence was so complete that it felt suffocating. "Jason?" She called out again, her voice barely a murmur under the surface. She kicked her legs gently, floating now, hoping for a response. But there was nothing. The sea felt massive, empty, stretching endlessly in all directions. Panic started to creep. And Lily's throat tightened as she realized the gravity of the situation. She was alone, far from the safety of the group, with nothing but the dark ocean around her. The cold water made her skin prickle. The sensation was one she hadn't expected, an alien feeling of vulnerability that she couldn't shake. "Keep calm," she whispered to herself. "Just go back, you can do this." She tried to steady her breathing, but the fear that had settled in her chest was already growing. Every movement of her arms seemed to propel her further away from the group, from safety. She forced herself to start swimming back, but the current seemed stronger now, pulling her farther from where she had come. She was kicking harder than before, but the distance didn't seem to close. The light from the bioluminescent plankton faded, the farther she moved away from the deeper water, and soon all she could see was the inky blackness surrounding her. The cold wasn't just from the water anymore. It was the gnawing chill of isolation, of being lost. "Jason!" she shouted this time, her voice louder, more desperate. She waited for a response, but all she heard was the echo of her own voice bouncing off the dark, empty water. There was no sound from the others, no answer. Her heart began to race faster, the sharp thudding of it in her chest making it harder to think clearly. "Focus, Lily," she told herself. "Just focus." She kicked harder, her breaths coming quicker, and then she felt it. The sensation was subtle at first. A flick of something in the water, brushing against her leg. Cold, slick. It made her freeze mid-stroke, her mind immediately on alert. A fish? She turned, her eyes searching the water, but the blackness around her seemed impenetrable, as if she were in a vacuum, with no way of telling what was lurking just out of sight. Then it came again. A brush against her leg, cold, like ice. Her heart skipped a beat. She kicked harder, panic flooding her limbs. Shit, shit, shit. She felt it now, a slight pressure against her skin, followed by something sharp, something unmistakably hard and pointed. Her leg was seized. The sensation was so sudden, so shocking that she couldn't even scream. The pain was excruciating. Her vision blurred as a shock of terror washed over her entire body. "No!" She kicked and twisted, her hands reaching down to claw at whatever had her. But her body was heavy, immobilized by the immense pressure. The sharp pain in her leg intensified, and she realized with horror that she was being pulled, dragged. Her leg was in something's mouth, something strong, relentless. Her breath caught in her throat. It's a shark. The realization was sickening. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the creature jerked her down, the world spinning into a blur of bubbles and water. She could feel the sharp edges of its teeth through the fabric of her wetsuit, biting into her skin with horrifying precision. Each tug was a terrible reminder of just how much power it had over her. She tried to scream, but only bubbles escaped her mouth. She lashed out with her fists, her legs, doing everything she could to break free, but it was no use. The shark's jaws tightened, and she felt the excruciating pressure on her thigh. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, sharp and deep, as though the very bones in her leg were being crushed. No, 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 no. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic, but she was still aware enough to understand that she had to do something, anything, to escape. She twisted her body, trying to break free, but the shark was faster, stronger. She could feel its weight, the strength of its muscles pulling her deeper. The water around her churned as she fought, her body growing weaker with each desperate movement. And then, for just a split second, the pain stopped. The shark released her leg. She didn't wait to think. Without hesitation, she kicked hard, pushing herself upwards, gasping for air. She broke the surface with a violent splash, her chest heaving as she drew in breath after breath, feeling the sting of the salt water against her cuts and bruises. Air. Her mind was dizzy with shock. Her leg throbbed with the pain of the bite, but she ignored it. She had to get back. She had to get back to the boat, to safety. She tried to turn and swim, but the current had shifted, pulling her away again. She screamed this time, louder, more frantic. "Jason!" she cried out, her voice raw with terror. "Help! Help!" The darkness around her was absolute. The boat was nowhere. The others were nowhere. There was nothing but the vast, empty ocean and the echo of her own voice. Her leg burned, each stroke sending waves of pain through her body. She couldn't keep swimming. She couldn't get any closer. The cold was overwhelming now. The numbness creeping up her leg. She was losing strength. The water felt colder, thicker with each passing second. She needed help. She needed to get back. But as she turned to look over her shoulder, she saw it. The shadow. It was moving slowly through the water, as though it was stalking her. The faintest hint of a fin sliced through the surface, and her blood ran cold. Her stomach twisted with fear. It's coming back. She panicked, swimming harder, but her body was giving out. Her breath was ragged, her vision blurry. The shark was closing in again. She could feel it, couldn't explain how, but she knew. Then suddenly a shape appeared on the horizon. The boat. Her heart skipped a beat. "Jason!" she screamed, her voice hoarse and weak. The boat was getting closer now. She could see the others, the outline of Jason's face as he shouted something, waving at her. The boat rushed toward her, and she gave one final desperate push, her arms flailing as she fought to stay afloat. She didn't look back. Lily's heart thundered in her chest as she turned her head and saw the shadow approaching. It was unmistakable. Now, a long, sleek figure cutting through the water with terrifying precision. The shark. The same predator that had torn into her leg, now circling back for another attack. It moved with an almost unnatural calmness, as though it had all the time in the world to stalk its prey. And Lily was its prey. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the cold seeping deeper into her bones as she tensed, desperately trying to stay, still in the water. She knew on some primal level that sudden movements would only attract it. But how could she stay still when every instinct in her screamed for her to swim, to fight, to escape? Think, Lily, think. The panic clouding her mind cleared, if only for a moment. Her eyes darted around, desperate to see anything that could help her. The boat, the reef, any sign of the group. But the water was still, silent, and dark. A suffocating void that held nothing but the terrifying reality of her situation. The shark was getting closer now, its dorsal fin barely visible, slicing through the surface with the precision of a predator that had hunted for centuries. "You're not going to make it." Her mind tried to reject the thought, tried to force some shred of hope into her racing thoughts. But she could feel the cold hands of reality tightening around her throat. The shark was almost on top of her now. Her leg throbbed with every heartbeat. The gash was deep, the blood oozing from the wound and staining the water around her. She could feel the warmth of it, mixing with the sea, turning the water even more treacherous, signaling her weakness to the predator below. The shark circled her, its movements deliberate, slow. It wasn't in a rush. It wasn't hungry enough to attack immediately. Instead, it seemed to be sizing her up, watching her struggle. Its dark eyes, those cold, black eyes, never left her, studying her every twitch, every ripple in the water. Lily's breath hitched as she felt a sudden, terrifying lurch in her chest. The shark was drawing closer, closer still. She could hear the faint rush of water as it moved, the sound of something enormous gliding through the ocean. The reality of her situation pressed in on her, like a vice around her ribs. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Please, she thought, her body trembling. Please don't let this be the end. In that moment, something primal inside her broke loose. The sheer terror of it all. The fear of the cold, of the dark, of the beast, lurking below, spurred her into action. She wasn't going to let it take her without a fight. She wasn't going to die in this endless void, alone and lost. Lily kicked hard, trying to push herself upward, away from the predator that was so dangerously close. The pain in her leg flared, sharp and hot, but she forced herself to ignore. And she had to get away, but as her legs moved, the shark's movements mirrored hers with deadly accuracy. The predator didn't need to rush, it was playing with her. No, not like this. Her mind raced. The panic was back in full force, clenching her chest. Her limbs burned with exhaustion, but she fought through it, kicking harder, trying to gain distance. Her body was no longer cooperating the way it should. Every stroke felt like it took more energy than the last. Her breath was ragged, and the taste of salt water clung to her lips. The shark was too close. It was just behind her now, its body sliding beneath her with a terrifying silence. Lily could feel its presence, the crushing pressure of its proximity. Her eyes darted to the surface, to the endless dark expanse above her, but the boat was still out of reach. She screamed, a raw, desperate sound that was swallowed by the water before it could ever be heard. Suddenly, the water around her stirred with force. Lily barely had time to react. A violent surge, a flash of silver, and she was jerked violently to the side. The shark had struck. Its teeth sank deep into her side, just above her hip, and the pain was overwhelming, a jolt of fiery agony that made her vision spin. Lily's body convulsed with the shock of it. She kicked again, her arms flailing, but the pain was so intense that it was almost blinding. Her body was caught in the shark's jaws, and she could feel its immense strength as it dragged her under, pulling her into the depths. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. The thought was there, sharp and clear, cutting through the chaos in her mind. The darkness of the ocean wrapped around her like a shroud, and she realized with a sickening clarity that she had no control. She had no way to fight this. Her mind raced for a way out, some small chance, some prayer. But the pain in her side was overwhelming, the coldness of the water seeping into her bones. She was going under, pulled deeper, the pressure of the water intensifying as she was dragged further into the ocean. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The pull on her body eased. The shark released its grip, its jaws opening just enough for Lily to break free. Gasping, she kicked frantically, pushing herself upward toward the surface, feeling the water rush around her. Her body was heavy, her movements slow and sluggish, but she didn't care. She had to get to air. Her head broke the surface with a violent gasp. She coughed, choking on salt water, but her lungs were starved for air. She sucked in deep breaths, her chest aching with each one. She could barely keep. Her eyes open, the pain in her side blinding, but she had no choice but to keep swimming. The shark was still out there. She could sense it, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for her next move. Keep moving, don't stop. She kicked again, harder, each stroke propelling her forward as her vision blurred. The blood from her leg and side mixed with the water, red haze swirling around her. It was getting harder to keep her balance. The pain in her leg and side was growing unbearable. Her body was exhausted, her limbs sluggish, and the fear was still a constant gnawing presence at the back of her mind. The shark could return at any moment. She kept kicking, hoping, praying that someone, anyone, would hear her, that Jason would find her, that the boat would come back. It felt like hours, but it had only been minutes, and then just as Lily thought she couldn't go any further, she heard it. A shout, a voice. "Lily! Jason!" She turned toward the sound, relief flooding her chest like a burst of warmth. "Lily, over here!" Jason's voice was urgent, cutting through the silence like a lifeline. She kicked harder. the pain in her body now a distant "Heck!" The boat was close, closer than she'd thought. Jason appeared in the water, silhouetted against the dim light of the boat. He was swimming toward her, his hand outstretched. "Grab my hand! Grab my hand, Lily!" His voice was firm, reassuring, and in that moment it was the sound of salvation. With a final burst of energy, Lily kicked toward him. Her body screamed in protest, but she didn't care. She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand, and in that instant everything shifted. Jason pulled her up, his arms strong around her waist, lifting her from the water. She collapsed against him, her head against his shoulder, tears stinging her eyes. "It's okay, you're okay," Jason said softly, his voice a constant comfort as he helped her back toward the boat. But even as he held her, as he guided her back to the safety of the boat, the weight of what had just happened settled heavily in Lily's chest. Her body was shaking from the cold, from the pain, from the terror. And as they reached the boat, the ocean, vast and unknowable, lay silent once again beneath them, its dark depths holding the secrets of its predators. The sharp sting in Lily's leg reminded her that time was running out. Each stroke she made to stay afloat was slower, more labored. Her breath came in gasps, and every movement felt like a battle against her own body. The weight of the ocean felt more oppressive now, as if it were closing in around her. Her heart pounded in her chest, her body trembling from both cold and fear. But as she kicked her legs, trying to keep herself above the water, the thought of the shark lingering beneath her seemed almost impossible to shake. She wasn't just fighting exhaustion, she was fighting terror. The open water felt endless, suffocating. No land, no boat, no one, just the crushing silence of the ocean and the gnawing pain in her body. She couldn't hear anything except her own ragged breathing and the occasional slosh of water against her wetsuit. Just keep moving, just keep moving. Lily tried to steady her breathing, though it was nearly impossible. Every breath she took felt shallow, desperate. She knew she had to conserve energy, but the instinct to escape, to survive, was stronger than anything else. Her eyes darted around again, scanning the black water. The fear of the shark returning was a shadow that followed her every movement. She could feel it there, waiting. Suddenly, the faint sound of a motor cut through the stillness. The high-pitched whine of an engine, too far away at first but growing louder. Lily's head whipped around, her eyes wide with hope, straining to see through the darkness. Her heart leaped in her chest. Is that the boat? She kicked harder, pushing herself toward the sound, though her body screamed in protest. Her arms ached, and the wound in her leg burned with every movement, but she had to get there. She had to reach them. "Help!" she croaked, her voice hoarse from the salt water. "Help!" The sound of the engine grew louder, and then, through the dark, she saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. The boat. It was there. Her salvation. She pushed herself harder, kicking furiously, her body surging toward it with whatever strength she had left. But as she swam, a movement beneath the water made her freeze. The shadow. The same shape, gliding beneath the surface, its presence. As ominous as ever, the shark was still there. Lily's blood ran cold. The boat was still too far away. The engine sounded closer now, but not close enough. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, the familiar, terrifying rhythm of survival kicking in. "No, no, you can't do this. Not now. Not when you're so close." She tried to ignore the shark, focusing everything she had left on the boat. She kicked harder, her breaths shallow and frantic, each stroke a desperate push forward. The water was beginning to feel thick, and the pain in her leg was getting unbearable. Every time she kicked, the injury flared up. Her leg was heavy, sluggish, her movements more labored. Just keep going. You can make it. But her body wasn't responding the way it should. It was like swimming through molasses, and no matter how much she forced herself, she couldn't seem to make any progress. She looked behind her again, the shark's form slipping, in and out of view beneath the surface. It was waiting, watching. Keep swimming, keep going. She saw the light again, and the engine sounded much closer now. Just a little further. Come on, just a little more. Her vision was blurred from both the pain and the tears that stung her eyes. She gritted her teeth and tried to block everything out. She couldn't afford to think. She couldn't afford to stop. But then, as she glanced back once more, she saw it clearly. The shark wasn't just circling. It was moving toward her. Its powerful body sliced through the water like a missile, its approach rapid and deliberate. "It's coming for me." Her mind screamed, but her body refused to cooperate. She kicked harder, her legs aching, but she couldn't escape. The water was becoming a thick, suffocating veil around her, the surface still too far away. Then, something unexpected happened. The boat, the light she had been swimming toward, appeared directly in front of her, its bright beam cutting through the darkness. The engine roared louder, and two figures appeared at the edge of the boat, their faces lit by the harsh light. "Are you okay?" a man's voice shouted across the water, rough and panicked. Lily tried to lift her arm, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her fingers twitched weakly, barely able to keep her afloat. Her lips parted, but her voice failed her. She was too exhausted, too beaten. Then a strong hand reached out. "Grab on!" the man shouted. Lily's hand stretched out instinctively. The man grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the boat with a surge of strength that made her gasp. The moment her body was near the edge, another hand reached down and helped lift her onto the deck. A wave of nausea hit her as the shock of being out of the water caught up with her. She collapsed onto the deck, gasping, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her leg burned where the shark had bitten her, and her side ached with the effort it took to breathe. But she was alive. She was safe. The man who had helped her onto the boat, a lifeguard by the look of his gear, knelt beside her, his face pale and serious. He was speaking to her, but she could barely hear the words over the ringing in her ears. "Stay with me. Stay awake. You're okay. You're safe now." She wanted to nod, to tell him she was okay, but the words wouldn't come. Her body trembled from shock, from the pain. She felt disoriented, like she wasn't entirely sure where she was anymore. Her thoughts were fragmented, pieces of terror and relief fighting for dominance. "Where's the shark?" she managed to rasp, her voice so faint she could barely hear. "It herself?" The lifeguard's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "It's gone. It's moved off. You're safe, but we need to get you back to the shore. Fast." Lily's gaze flickered up to the other person on the boat, a woman who had been checking a first aid kit. She nodded grimly. "We need to get her stabilized. She's lost a lot of blood." Lily's body shuddered again, and her eyes fluttered closed, the darkness of exhaustion threatening to pull her under. But she forced them open, determined not to slip into unconsciousness, not when she had come so close to death. "Can you help her?" the woman asked, her voice urgent but calm. "We're going to get you patched up," the man assured Lily as he turned to her leg. "Stay with us, okay? Just stay with us." Lily could hear the sound of the engine revving up again. The boat lurched forward as the woman tended to her, applying pressure to her leg to stop the bleeding. Lily tried to focus, but the pain, the exhaustion, and the trauma of everything she had just gone through were too overwhelming. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the voices of the two strangers around her become a blurry comfort. But then, as the boat cut through the water, she felt the sudden weight of her fear begin to lift. She had survived. The shark was gone. The pain was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. She was safe, for now. The boat lurched forward, the engine roaring as it cut through the dark water, slicing a path toward the shore. Lily lay on the deck, her body trembling violently with the aftershocks of her ordeal. The air felt colder than it should, and despite the warmth of the boat's engine and the blanket that had been hastily thrown over her, she couldn't seem to stop shaking. Her pulse pounded in her ears, the rhythm of it reminding her of the shark's approach, each beat echoing the terror of what had just happened. She could still feel the water, the weight of it pressing against her body, pulling her down, the cold, the pressure, and the shark circling, watching. Her leg burned, the pain searing through her every time the boat hit a wave. The wound was deep, and blood had soaked through the bandages the lifeguard had wrapped around it. She could still smell the salty tang of her own blood mixing with the sea air. Her side ached from the impact of the shark's bite, the whole ordeal so surreal that she kept blinking, hoping the nightmare would fade into some sort of twisted dream. But it hadn't. She was still here, still alive. "Stay with me, Lily," the lifeguard said, his voice calm but urgent. He was kneeling beside her, one hand gently pressing against her shoulder as if to keep her anchored to reality. "You're doing great. Just a little longer." Lily nodded weakly, but her vision was blurred, her body disconnected from the world around her. It was as if the ocean's grip on her had left an invisible mark, one that she couldn't quite shake off. She stared out at the water, seeing only blackness, hearing only the hum of the engine and the rush of the wind. Every wave felt like it might pull her back into the depths. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" The woman who had been checking the first aid kit crouched down next to her, her face shadowed by the dim light of the boat's headlamps. Lily shook her head, then winced as the motion caused her ribs to flare with pain. Just my leg. And my side, where it bit me." "We're almost there," the woman said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're going to be okay. We're going to get you to the hospital, and they'll take care of everything. Just keep breathing for me." Lily nodded again, though it felt like her head was underwater. The woman checked her pulse, and Lily felt the cold hands of fear creeping back. She had been rescued, yes, but it wasn't over. She could still feel the shark beneath her skin, still feel its presence as if it were watching her from just outside her peripheral vision. "It's over, Lily," she told herself. "You're safe." But even as the thought formed, she couldn't shake the tightness in her chest, the anxiety, the fear. It clung to her like a second skin. The boat hit another wave, and Lily gasped at the sudden jolt. Her leg screamed in protest, the pain raw and unforgiving. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to steady her breathing. She could hear the lifeguard's voice again, his tone soft, steady as if he were trying to anchor her to the present. "You're doing good," he said. "We're almost there, just hang in there." She let her eyes flutter open again, the darkness of the ocean stretching out before her. She had no idea how far the shore was, couldn't see anything beyond the boat's immediate wake, but she knew that it had to be close. The light from the boat, the distant outline of the coastline, they were all small beacons of hope in the vast, empty night. Just a little more, just a little longer. "How long?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the salt water and the effort it took to speak. She tried to push the panic down, but it rose up again, bubbling in her chest. "Not long at all," the lifeguard assured her. "We've got the current on our side. You're going to be back on land soon." But as he spoke, Lily noticed something else. The boat's engine sputtered, the hum of it faltering for just a moment. It was slight, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make her heart skip a beat. "Everything okay?" Lily asked, her voice cracking. The lifeguard's face tightened for a second, his gaze flicking to the engine. He didn't say anything at first, but the woman who had been checking the first aid kit looked over at the lifeguard, and then at Lily. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but nothing came out. Then the engine stuttered again. "Shit," the lifeguard muttered, rushing to the engine and inspecting it. The woman stood up, her body tense, and she glanced out at the water. Lily's pulse quickened. "Is everything okay?" she repeated, her voice desperate. "Why did it stop? Why is it not working?" The lifeguard gritted his teeth, his hands working over the engine with practiced efficiency. "Just a malfunction," he said, though his voice was tight. "We're still moving, but the engine's... It's not running at full capacity. We're going to be okay, just need a minute to get it back up." Lily felt her body tense in response, her anxiety rising with the unsettling quiet that had fallen over them. For a moment, there was only the sound of the waves lapping against the boat, the distant hum of the engine. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the water, the darkness, feeling that same sharp fear creep into her chest again. Her mind raced. What if the shark came back? What if it had been waiting for this? The vulnerability of the situation, the quiet that surrounded them, made her feel even more exposed than before. Her leg throbbed again, and she winced, trying to push through, trying to ignore the tremors that racked her body. "You're going to be okay," the woman said again, her voice firm. But Lily could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. The lifeguard slammed the engine with a grunt of frustration. "Come on," he muttered. Then, with a louder curse, he pulled something loose and twisted a dial. The engine roared back. To life, the sound now louder, steadier. Lily closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping in relief. "All right," the lifeguard said, finally looking back at her. "We're good, we're back on track. Let's get you to safety." The boat picked up speed again, the engine now humming steadily beneath them. Lily's body felt heavier, her muscles sore, but at least now she knew the danger wasn't imminent. They were moving toward the shore again, gaining distance from the ocean's cold grip. Her heart still beat hard in her chest, her mind still racing with the memory of the shark. But the shore was close now. She could see the faint outlines of lights on the beach, people milling around, a small reassurance that there were others nearby. She could hear the distant sound of voices now, shouting, calling. The boat was making its way toward the safety of the shore, and Lily was going to make it. Her hands trembled as she gripped the blanket tighter around herself. She wasn't sure if it was the fear that still clung to her or the trauma of what she had just survived, but she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow the ocean was still waiting, still watching. But for now, she was safe. And that had to be enough. The boat cut through the water, the lights of the shore growing brighter, and Lily, though her mind and body were broken in ways she couldn't yet understand, finally allowed herself to believe that she might, just might, make it out of this alive. The boat surged forward again, the engine now humming steadily beneath Lily's feet. She let out a shaky breath, her hand instinctively clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her mind was still racing, her heart still hammering in her chest. Despite the relief of hearing the engine roar back to life, the fear had not yet left her. In fact, it felt as though it was growing with every passing moment, settling deep in her bones, colder and deeper than the ocean itself. "You're okay," the lifeguard said, his voice quieter now, but still firm. He had returned to his post, standing near the front of the boat, keeping watch. "You're safe. We're almost there." Lily nodded weakly, though the words felt hollow in her ears. She wasn't sure she could ever feel safe again, not after what had happened, not after the shark, its dark silhouette looming just beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her hand reached for her leg again, instinctively rubbing the bandaged wound. The pain was sharp and persistent, a constant reminder of the terror she had just experienced. Every movement made it flare up, a constant pull in her muscles, a warning that her body wasn't ready to forget. The woman who had been checking the first aid kit knelt down next to her again. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone soft, but there was a clear urgency in her voice, as if she were trying to gauge Lily's state of mind. I'm fine," Lily said, her voice strained, though she knew it wasn't true. She wasn't fine. She wasn't sure what was real anymore. It doesn't feel real. I don't know if I can..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. There were too many emotions swirling inside her: fear, disbelief, the overwhelming sensation of drowning not in water, but in her own mind. "I know," the woman said, "but you're strong. You made it through the hardest part. We just need to get you back to the shore and to the hospital." She looked at the lifeguard, who was still scanning the water, and then back to Lily. "Can you stay awake for a little longer? We need you to keep talking to us." Lily nodded again, the effort of even that simple gesture feeling heavy. "I'll try," she whispered, blinking rapidly against the sting in her eyes. She had never realized how much of a fight it was just to stay awake, just to hold on to consciousness. She wanted to slip away into sleep, but something in the back of her mind told her that if she let herself go, she might never wake up again. The woman's eyes softened. "You're doing great, but we need to keep you alert. If you start feeling faint or dizzy, let me know, okay?" Lily nodded. Again, though the last thing she wanted was to talk. The weight of silence, though, was unbearable. The thought of closing her eyes again, of slipping back into the dark to where the shark had waited, had followed her, was more than she could bear. Her gaze flickered to the lifeguard, who hadn't taken his eyes off the horizon. He was tense, his posture rigid. The ocean around them was vast and empty, the inky blackness stretching out into nothingness. There was nothing to see, but Lily couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of it, the quiet pressure of the water pushing in on them from every direction. Do you think it will come back?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The lifeguard didn't look at her at first, but his expression tightened, as though the question itself was something he hadn't been prepared for. When he did speak, his voice was flat, even professional, but the underlying tension was undeniable. "No," he said, "it's not likely. Reef sharks are territorial. They don't usually chase prey for long distances. He paused, his eyes darting over the water again. We'll be out of its range soon enough. But keep your eyes on the horizon, okay? We're getting close. Lily looked toward the horizon, though there was nothing there but more blackness. The shore was invisible in the distance, just another promise of safety that felt far too fragile. Her leg throbbed again, and her thoughts scattered as the pain swelled. She had to keep moving, keep breathing, keep pushing herself forward, but then a shadow, a flicker of movement in the water, caught her eye. Her breath caught in her throat, and her whole body stiffened. She felt a knot of dread form deep in her gut. The wave had passed, but the shape in the water didn't. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The lifeguard snapped his head toward her, his eyes hardening, his body going rigid. His hand gripped the side of the boat, knuckles white. "Stay still," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Don't move. Whatever you do, don't make any sudden movements." Lily froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Her mind raced. What was it? Was it the shark? The boat was moving fast, but that shape in the water, that unmistakable shift in the water's surface, was unmistakable. Is it the shark?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. The lifeguard didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the water, scanning it with an intensity that bordered on panic. The woman stepped closer to Lily, her voice soft but steady. "It's okay. Just stay calm. We're getting you out of here." But Lily couldn't stop looking. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the water. The shadow was too clear now, too definite. "It's coming closer," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the engine. "I said stay." "Still," the lifeguard snapped, his voice harsher than before. His hands moved quickly, checking the boat's gear, tightening a rope. "We're almost there. It's not the shark, I promise you. It's something else." Lily didn't understand what he meant. There was nothing else out here but them and the water and the thing that had attacked her. She could feel the ocean closing in again, the dark waves lapping at the sides of the boat, whispering of danger and finality. The lifeguard barked another command to the woman at the back of the boat, who immediately began to pull a flashlight from a compartment. "Hold on," he said to Lily, his voice now calm but tinged with something darker. "I'm going to signal for help. We need to be sure." Lily could barely process the words as the woman turned the flashlight on, aiming it toward the water. The beam cut through the night like a beacon, illuminating the water below them in harsh, stilted flashes. But the shadow was gone. The surface of the water was calm again, eerily so. Lily's pulse began to slow, though she couldn't let go of the feeling that the terror hadn't passed. It had only paused. The lifeguard's expression softened, his posture relaxing just slightly. "I don't think it was the shark. I'm sorry. It's just the way the waves move at night. Sometimes they play tricks on you." Lily exhaled, but the fear still clung to her, heavy and persistent. She wanted to believe him, but in the back of her mind she couldn't help but wonder, what if it hadn't been a trick? What if it was just waiting just below the surface? The boat surged forward, its engine now a distant hum beneath the tension in the air. Lily could feel her heart racing faster than the boat was moving. Her legs felt like dead weight, the pain from the bite in her thigh sending jolts of agony every time the boat hit a wave. Her breath came in ragged bursts, but she was too afraid to close her eyes. She couldn't bear to slip back into that space. The water, the darkness, the weight of the shark, its jaws closing in around her. But even as the engine hummed steadily, even as the lifeguard's presence remained solid and reassuring beside her, the dread didn't leave. She knew the shark hadn't just disappeared. It had to be out there, still watching, still waiting. The thought of it made her feel like the air around her was suffocating, like the very sea beneath them was an enemy she couldn't outrun. "Almost. There, Lily," the woman beside her said, her voice firm but quiet. She'd been checking Lily's leg for the past few minutes, making sure the makeshift bandages held, though Lily was too far gone in her own head to register what was happening. The woman's movements were mechanical, practiced, but there was a subtle urgency to them, something that suggested they weren't as out of the woods as they'd hoped. Lily couldn't focus on what the woman was doing. Her eyes kept darting. Back to the water, to the dark abyss that felt like it was closing in on them. Do you think it will come back?" Lily finally asked, her voice a strained whisper. The woman didn't answer right away, instead looking up at the lifeguard in front of them, He was still scanning the horizon, his posture tense, but he didn't give any indication that he'd heard Lily's question. After a long pause, the woman spoke, her voice soft yet insistent. "No, the shark's not coming back. They tend to move on once they've attacked. You're safe now." Lily wanted to believe her, really she did. But a part of her couldn't shake the fear that clawed at her insides, a gnawing, relentless terror. "I don't know if I can believe that," Lily muttered. Her voice cracked, and she could feel her hands trembling as she clutched the blanket tighter around her. "What if it's just waiting out there? What if it's still following us?" The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gently placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, the touch surprisingly comforting. "The shark isn't going to chase us. Reef sharks, especially the one that attacked you, they don't hunt like that. They won't follow a boat for long." Lily swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising tide of panic that threatened to overtake her. The woman's words made sense. Reef sharks weren't the type to stalk their prey across miles of open water, but the images in her mind wouldn't go away. The dark shape circling below her, the cold touch of its teeth on her flesh, the sense of helplessness as it ripped into her body. The lifeguard suddenly turned and walked toward them, his face grim. "We're almost there. Should be about 5 minutes, maybe less," he said, trying to offer some reassurance. His tone was firm, but there was an edge to it, a wariness that didn't sit well with Lily. She noticed the way he was constantly looking over his shoulder, scanning the water. "Are you sure?" Lily asked, her voice tight. I don't want to be out here any longer than we have to be. What if it does come back? What if—" "Enough," the lifeguard snapped, his face hardening. "You need to calm down. We're not in any danger anymore. The shark's gone. You're alive, and you're going to make it through this. But if you keep panicking, it's only going to make things worse." Lily flinched at his sharp tone, the words hitting her harder than she expected. But as much as it stung, there was truth in what he said. She couldn't keep spiraling. She had to focus, had to survive. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can't stop thinking about it. What happened down there? It felt like I was going to die." "I know," the lifeguard said, his expression softening slightly. He glanced back at the water one more time before turning his full attention to Lily. "But you're here. You made it. The worst is over. We're almost there." Lily nodded, her throat tight as she tried to absorb his words. They were close to safety, close to the shore. She just had to hold on a little longer. Minutes passed in silence, the rhythmic hum of the boat's engine, the only sound in the stillness. Lily could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, thumping in time with the engine. It felt like time had stretched out, like the minutes were stretching into hours. The wound in her leg throbbed relentlessly, a constant reminder of the pain she had endured. But it was the fear, the deep, gnawing fear that stayed with her, as if it were part of her now, a shadow that followed her wherever she went. And then, just when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, the woman spoke again. "We're almost there," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Just stay with me, okay? We've got you." Lily nodded, barely able to speak. She tried to focus on the woman's words, tried to push the fear away, but it was hard. So hard. The boat seemed to pick up speed, the shoreline finally coming into view. Lily could just make out the distant shape of the dock, the faint lights of the small harbor in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a beacon of safety. And then, just as the dock seemed to grow larger, just as the faintest glimmer of hope began to pierce through the dark, Lily's breath caught in her throat. A splash. The sound was so faint, so distant, she almost thought she had imagined it. But there it was again, a slap of water against the boat's side. Lily's heart stopped. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The lifeguard immediately turned, scanning the water, his hand going to the side of the boat, gripping it tightly. He looked back at the woman and then at Lily, his eyes wide with the unmistakable look of concern. "It's nothing," he said quickly. But there was no confidence in his voice. "Stay calm, we're almost there." But Lily didn't believe him. She could hear it now, the movement in the water, just beyond the boat. Something was out there. She could feel it, feel the weight of it, lurking just beneath the surface. And then, as if on cue, there was another sound. This time, louder, closer, a violent splash that made the boat rock. Lily's breath caught in her throat. "It's back," she gasped. "It's coming." Back. The woman immediately grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her closer, her voice urgent. "Stay low, don't make a sound." The lifeguard didn't wait for any more words. He grabbed a flashlight, pointing it into the water, scanning the surface. His hand was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. The fear was there, just beneath the surface. "Hold on," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We're almost there. Just stay down. We're not letting it get close." But Lily wasn't. Listening. Her eyes were fixed on the water, on the dark shadow that was growing larger with every passing second. The shark was coming back. The splash echoed in Lily's mind, a sharp, stinging sound that brought every part of her body to full attention. The boat surged forward, but she could feel the shift in the air. The lifeguard was no longer calm, no longer in control. The tension in his posture was palpable, and even the woman beside her stiffened. "What was that?" Lily whispered, her voice shaking. The lifeguard didn't respond immediately. He had turned toward the back of the boat, his eyes scanning the water with an intensity that sent a wave of cold dread over Lily. She felt the ocean, its vast emptiness, close in around her again, its darkness rising like a living thing. "Is it a shark?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was asking the lifeguard or herself. The woman beside her shifted, her hand gently gripping Lily's shoulder, but Lily could feel her own fingers trembling in response, her body freezing against the instinct to turn and run, though there was nowhere to run to. There was no escape. Only the water, and whatever was lurking beneath it. "Stay still," the lifeguard snapped, his voice strained, louder now. His gaze was fixed on the dark horizon. "Don't make any sudden movements." Lily tried to steady her breathing, but every time the boat crested a wave, the splash seemed to ripple through the air, returning to her ears like a haunting reminder. She clutched her legs to her chest, half expecting the water to surge over the side and drag her back into the depths. Her pulse thudded in her throat. "Is it a shark?" Lily asked again, her voice sharp now, panic creeping into her every word. "Please, just tell me what's happening." The lifeguard still didn't answer. Instead, his eyes darted around in a way that sent chills down Lily's spine. He gripped the side of the boat even harder, his knuckles white. "Keep low," he said, barely above a whisper. "Stay quiet." Lily's mind reeled, the images of the shark's face flashing in her mind. The dark, predatory eyes, the rows of sharp teeth, the weight of its presence in the water. But nothing had prepared her for this. She had been attacked, yes, but not like this. Not like the way the boat was trembling beneath her now, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. "What is it?" Lily asked again, the question growing louder, more frantic. The lifeguard's face tightened, his jaw clenching as if fighting back something. Fear, maybe. He shook his head slowly, a bitter look crossing his face. "I don't know," he admitted, quietly. "But whatever it is, it's close." Lily's stomach churned, her throat dry with fear. Her gaze swept the water, but all she saw was blackness. There was no shape, no movement, nothing to signal a presence, just the silent expanse of the ocean, still as death itself. The woman next to her spoke, her voice calm, too calm. "We're almost there. Just hold on, okay?" Lily didn't respond. She couldn't. Her whole body was locked in place, frozen, her eyes tracing the surface of the water as if she could somehow will the thing out of existence. Then, another splash. This one was closer. Too close. Lily gasped, her breath catching, in her throat. Her eyes shot to the lifeguard. He was still staring ahead, still motionless, but his lips were pressed into a tight line. She could see him subtly motioning for the woman to move to the back of the boat. The woman nodded, her movements silent and quick. "Don't move," the lifeguard warned again, his voice urgent. The woman moved away without a word, disappearing behind the boat's small cabin, out of Lily's sight. For a moment, the boat seemed to settle into a strange quiet, but the silence felt unnatural. It was too still, like the calm before a storm. "Please," Lily whispered, her voice breaking. She didn't know what she wanted. Comfort, reassurance, safety, but she couldn't find any of those things in the stillness. Not here. Not with the water so close, so threatening. "We're almost there," the lifeguard repeated, his voice tight, clipped. But the way he said it was different. There was no confidence in it now, no promise of safety. Lily watched him, her eyes wide as the boat began to slow. She didn't understand why. Why had they stopped moving? She had to get to the shore, had to escape. "Why are we stopping?" she asked, but the question was barely audible over the rush of her own pulse. He didn't respond right away, his focus still on the water. There was something in his eyes, something flickering between dread and determination, but it was gone too quickly for Lily to grasp. "We're getting closer to the harbor," he finally said, his voice calm again, but it didn't sound like he believed it. "Just hold on." Lily didn't feel any closer to safety. In fact, the distance between them and the shore seemed to stretch farther with every second. Her breath came too quickly, and she could feel the panic rising in her chest again. Her leg burned with pain, but it was nothing compared to the fear gnawing at her insides. The boat lurched suddenly, and Lily gasped, her hands flying out instinctively to steady herself. The lifeguard didn't seem to notice. He was still staring at the water, his body rigid with tension. There was a low, eerie sound that came from beneath them, a sound like something moving in the water, something heavy. Lily froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The sound grew louder, closer. The boat rocked again, and then another splash. This time it was unmistakable. "It's coming," Lily whispered. The lifeguard's expression didn't change, but the veins in his neck stood out, and his grip on the boat tightened even further. His voice, when it came, was barely above a murmur. "Get to the back," he ordered. "Now." Lily didn't think. She just reacted, scrambling toward the back of the boat, her injured legs screaming in protest. She collapsed against the small cabin at the back, her breath shallow, her eyes darting wildly in search of any sign of what was in the water. Then she saw it, a shadow, darker than the night, cutting through the surface of the water with a smooth, predatory grace. It was the shark. Lily's heart stuttered in her chest as she stared at it, the dark form moving below. Them, gliding through the water with a speed and fluidity that seemed impossible. She could see the shape of its body, sleek and muscular, its dorsal fins slicing the surface like a blade. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't." "Stay low," the lifeguard ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't make any sudden moves." Lily's mind raced. She knew what it was, she knew what it meant, and still she couldn't move. Her body refused to listen, locked in place by the primal terror surging through her veins. The shark circled, moving closer, its eyes glowing faintly in the water. Lily could hear the faintest rush of its movement, the glide of its body cutting through the surface. But it was the silence that terrified her the most. The eerie, absolute silence of it. No splashing, no disturbance, just the feeling that it was waiting. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't let it come any closer." The lifeguard didn't answer. He was focused entirely on the water, his body taut, his every muscle coiled. He was waiting, watching, calculating, but the shark was closing in, its movements deliberate. Another splash, closer now, and then finally the lifeguard spoke, his voice calm, controlled, but with an undercurrent of urgency that Lily could feel in the pit of her stomach. "We need to make it to shore," he said. "We don't have much time." With those words, the boat lurched forward again, and the engine roared to life. The shadow in the water grew larger, emerging like a dark shape in the dim light of the boat's few flickering lanterns. Lily's heart stopped, her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the shadow, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. But the slow, steady movement of it told her this was no illusion. "It's coming back," she whispered, her voice a mix of terror and disbelief. The lifeguard's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward, trying to get a better look. "Stay low," he muttered almost to himself. "It's not done yet." Lily's mind raced. She tried to breathe, but every inhale was a shallow gasp, a frantic attempt to maintain some control. She looked to the woman beside her, who was gripping the boat's side with white knuckles, her eyes wide and filled with the same fear that Lily felt crawling up her spine. "What do we do?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. The woman didn't answer right away. She turned her gaze toward the lifeguard, who was now slowly and methodically pulling out a flare gun from a compartment beneath the boat's seat. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the lifeguard carefully load the gun, his movements deliberate, almost mechanical. Will this help? Lily's voice broke the silence again, panic creeping back into her words. It might, the lifeguard said, his voice low, calm, but strained. But we need to be prepared for anything. Just stay quiet and don't panic. Lily's body shook with adrenaline. Her mind caught between two realities, the terror of the shark's presence and the cold, relentless logic of the lifeguard's instructions. She tried to keep herself still, but her leg throbbed with every heartbeat, a constant reminder of the wound she had sustained earlier. She could feel the blood thick and sticky beneath the bandages, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she wondered if she had bled out more than she realized. But there was no time to think about that now. Not with the shark possibly circling beneath. Them? What's the plan? The woman beside Lily asked, her voice steady, though her eyes told a different story. She was just as terrified as Lily, but she was trying to keep it together. How do we get out of this? The lifeguard's gaze flicked from the flare gun to the water, the shadow still moving ominously below the surface. We keep our distance from it, he said, his voice grim. If it charges, we'll use the flare. That should scare it off. But what if it doesn't work? Lily asked, her voice panicked now. She couldn't stop herself from trembling. What if it keeps coming? The lifeguard didn't answer. Instead, he pointed the flare gun toward the dark water, his finger hovering over the trigger. The boat creaked beneath them as it rocked gently in the swell of the ocean, and Lily's eyes darted back and forth between the shadow in the water and the lifeguard, whose jaw was clenched tightly. The tension was unbearable. Every second stretched into eternity. Then, just as the darkness seemed to envelop them, a sudden splash broke the silence. It was louder than before, closer than ever, and it sent a wave of fear surging through Lily's body. Her breath hitched in her chest as she instinctively crouched lower into the boat. The lifeguard's eyes widened, and without a second thought he pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a sharp hiss, bursting into a brilliant orange light that illuminated the ocean in a fiery glow. The water beneath them churned violently, the flare's light reflecting off the surface, casting long shadows that danced across the dark sea. The flare's heat seared the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause, frozen in time. Then, the water erupted. A massive surge came from below, a towering explosion of foam and spray as the shark shot to the surface. Lily screamed, her voice raw and frantic, as the massive predator broke the surface, its dark body crashing through the water with a primal force. The shark's head rose above the water, jaws open wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth glistening in the flare's light. The woman next to Lily gasped, her face pale as she grabbed onto the boat's edge, her fingers trembling. The lifeguard stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the creature in front of them, and Lily could see the flicker of fear in his eyes, the realization that this wasn't a simple encounter anymore. This was something far more dangerous, far more unpredictable. The shark circled the boat, its body undulating through the water with terrifying grace. Its dark eyes locked onto them, as if calculating its next move, sizing them up. Lily couldn't breathe. Every inch of her skin felt like it was on fire, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. The boat rocked harder now, the water splashing against the sides as the shark made another pass. She could see the sleek, muscular body gliding effortlessly beneath the surface, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a knife. The lifeguard's eyes were fixed on the creature, and Lily could see him trying to gauge its movements. He knew that the flare wouldn't hold the shark back for long. "Get ready," he said, his voice steely now. "If it comes at us again, we use the flare again." Lily nodded, though her stomach twisted with dread. The shark was circling closer now, its presence looming over them. She could hear the soft splashes of water as it moved below them, and she tried to suppress the urge to scream, to panic. She had to keep it together. She had to survive. The woman beside her whispered, her voice shaky, "What if it's too late? What if we don't make it?" Lily didn't know how to answer that. She could feel the weight of those words, the deep fear that came with them. What if it was too late? What if they couldn't escape? Another splash. Closer. The lifeguard didn't hesitate this time. He raised the flare gun again, his finger tight on the trigger. The shark's massive body surged up beneath them, and in that instant, the lifeguard fired again. The flare shot out with a deafening hiss, and the shark, startled by the sudden burst of light and heat, veered off, splashing violently in its wake. For a moment the water stilled. The shark was gone, its dark shape retreating back into the depths, but the relief was short-lived. The boat continued to rock, the tension still thick in the air. Lily's heart hammered in her chest, her body trembling from the sheer force of the adrenaline. She wanted to believe it was over. She wanted to believe that the shark had finally left them alone, but deep down she knew the danger wasn't over yet. The shark was out there, waiting, circling. The lifeguard looked to the horizon, scanning the water one last time before turning back to them. He exhaled slowly, his body tense but relieved. "It's gone," he said, his voice more composed. Now, but the edge of fear still lingered. Lily couldn't believe him. Couldn't believe that they were safe, not yet. She glanced at the water once more, her pulse still racing, her body still on high alert. And then she saw it. A ripple in the water. So subtle at first that she wasn't sure if she imagined it, but it was there. Just beneath the surface, a shift, a movement. Something large. Something that shouldn't be there. The lifeguard saw it too. His face hardened. "Move!" he shouted. "Move! Now!" Before she could react, the boat surged forward, the woman beside her pulling her up with frantic urgency. "Get to the back!" she cried. Lily's heart leapt in her chest as she stumbled, her injured leg giving way beneath her. She barely managed to catch herself as she reached the back of the boat, her hands gripping the edge desperately. And then the unthinkable happened. The shark lunged, its jaws opened wide, its massive body leaping from the water in one final, terrifying attack. But it didn't hit the boat. No, instead it vanished back into the deep as if it had been an illusion all along. For a moment no one moved. The boat rocked again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the movement of the shark beneath them. It was the movement of the ocean, calm once again. The shark was gone. They were safe. For now.